Marshall Peak, Chapter 5961, Profound Source Gate. Marshall Peak. The young Holy Son didn't know what to do. After Sai Kong Nan brought him back to the spirit religion, he started cultivating in secret and didn't come into contact with the outside world for 10 years. The moment he was made known to the public, he had to lead the light spirit religion's soldiers to launch the final battle against the Black Ink cult, just like the Savior described in the prophecy. It could be said that he was still puzzled as to what was going on, but it didn't stop him from enjoying the victory after an intense battle. As everyone looked at him, he raised his hand and balled up a fist. In an instant, all of them stopped cheering and stared fixedly at him. He then shouted, "May the light prevail." After a moment of silence, the crowd cheered even louder. Standing in front of them, the Saintess and Li Fei Yu exchanged glances and smiled. Initially, they decided to make the fake Holy Son known to the public so that the light spirit religion would have a reason to launch a war. After coming into contact with him though, they realized he was a pure-hearted and kind person. Such a person, coupled with his military achievements, was good enough to be the Holy Son. Certainly, the real Holy Son, who had been taking action in secret, wouldn't mind it. Holy Son, the Thunder Order Lord, Yu Dao Kai, stepped forward. Although we've killed most of the Black Ink cult members, some remaining ones are in front of the Black Ink abyss. Please go over and have a look to determine their life or death. The Holy Son asked curiously, "Are some of the Black Ink cult members still alive?" Yu Dao Kai replied, "They're the Night Chapter Master Xueji and her 4 blood slaves." "It's her." The Holy Son nodded gently. "Certainly, I have to meet her. I heard that she had assassinated many Black Ink cult masters, including Yu Bu Ju. If not for her help, we wouldn't have been able to win the war so easily." Regardless of what Xueji was like in the past, she had made a huge contribution to the fight against the Black Ink cult. Therefore, the young Holy Son was fond of her and thought that he should thank her in person. With the Holy Son and the Saintess leading the way, the spirit religion masters set off towards the Black Ink abyss. When they arrived, they realized the atmosphere was both gloomy and tense. Xueji and her blood slaves stood there in silence while some spirit religion masters confronted them. When the masters from the spirit religion saw the Holy Son and the others, they finally felt relieved. After Xueji killed Yu Bu Ju, there was no doubt she was the most powerful cultivator in the world. When the spirit religion's immortal ascension boundary masters faced her, they felt immensely pressured, even though Xueji merely stood there without doing anything. The crowd parted to the sides while the Holy Son walked up to Xueji. Yu Dao Kai secretly warned, "Be careful, Holy Son." The Holy Son nodded and stood in front of Xueji before saluting her. Light Spirit Religion's Wu Ding greets Senior Xueji. Xueji lifted her gaze and swept a glance over him before asking with a smile, "Are you the Holy Son?" Wu Ding scratched his head, "I think so. That's what everyone calls me." Xueji was surprised by his somewhat childish behavior, but a moment later, she shook her head with a smile, "You're still too green." Wu Ding replied respectfully, "You have a point, Senior. I'm still a young and inexperienced cultivator, so I might make mistakes from time to time. Please forgive me if I've offended you in any way." A helpless Xueji looked at him and sighed, "That's not what I meant." She knew that the young Holy Son must have misunderstood something. What she meant was that compared to her inscrutable master, the young Holy Son was still just a child. Although young Kai had never told her anything, she realized long ago that the true Holy Son described in the prophecy must be her master. The young man before her eyes was only a fake that the spirit religion had used to launch a war against the Black Ink cult. Initially, she was hostile towards this man, thinking that he had snatched the glory that belonged to his master, a truth which displeased her. However, when she saw the Holy Son's behavior for herself, she couldn't bring herself to loathe him. The Holy Son scratched his head again. Just as he was ready to speak, Yu Dao Kai bellowed all of a sudden, "Surrender without a fight, demon woman." Xueji turned to look at him, but she didn't have the intention of responding to him, so she glanced over at Li Fei Yu and said, "Big Sister Li, are you guys planning to kill me after everything I've done for you? If that's the case, couldn't you have warned me earlier so that I could get prepared?" Li Fei Yu shook her head, "That's not our intention. Don't read too much into it." The Order Lords were puzzled, feeling that there was something they were not aware of. Yu Daokai questioned with a frown. What do you mean? Li Fei Yu explained. Xueji has sided with us. Previously, the Saintess told me to contact Xueji in secret. We have been coordinating with her so she could assassinate those black ink cult masters. It's because of her assistance that we've been able to march forward and destroy the enemy with ease over the past month. Hearing that, all of them were shocked. Sai Kong Nan muttered, why have we never heard of it before? The Saintess said with a smile, we've decided to keep it a secret since the matter was both sensitive and of critical importance. Forgive me. Since the Saintess had admitted to it, that must be the truth. Moreover, given the outcome, Xueji had indeed made a huge contribution. At that moment, many of them looked at her with milder expressions. They were certainly pleased to have an ally like her. With a dark expression, Yu Daokai said, you've acted rashly this time, Holy Saintess. Even if you refuse to tell us about it, you shouldn't have kept it a secret from the Holy Sun. After all, he is the savior. The Holy Sun waved his hand. It's fine. It is true that I am inexperienced and know nothing about the current situation or how to handle it. Big Sister Saintess can continue to take charge of the spirit religion's affairs. Yu Daokai was rendered speechless, thinking that the Holy Sun was no different from a wastrel trying to avoid responsibility at this moment. After a moment of silence, he followed up, in that case, you'd better leave now. You're the Night Chapter Master from the Black Ink Cult. Although you've helped us a lot, we can't accept you. Xueji replied with a smile, I've never intended to join your religion. Yu Daokai appeared perplexed. Since you don't want to join us, why did you betray the Black Ink Cult? A sense of longing appeared on Xueji's face as she replied, because I've found a higher goal to pursue. All of them were astounded, thinking that the woman might have misspoken. It was inconceivable that a powerful woman like her had found a higher goal to pursue, thus, she betrayed the Black Ink Cult. An irritated Yu Daokai waved his hand. Regardless, we have nothing to do with each other from now on, and you mustn't commit any more crimes just because you're powerful. You can leave now. Xueji shook her head, I can't go. After a pause, she asked, are you planning to explore the Black Ink Abyss secrets? Yu Daokai nodded. The Black Ink Cult has been destroyed, but since the Black Ink Abyss is the source of the Black Ink Cult, we certainly have to look into it. We have to suppress and seal this place so that the Black Ink Cult will never return. The Order Lords nodded as it was indeed their plan. Xueji said, you should wait here, then. Someone told me to stay here and make sure no one enters the Black Ink Abyss. Yu Daokai snapped, Xueji, we are magnanimous enough to let you go since you've helped us a lot, but don't reach for a yard after we've given you an inch. Xueji smiled charmingly, I have my orders. If you want to enter the Black Ink Abyss, you must kill me first. At that moment, the Saintess appeared agitated and asked, is he inside the Black Ink Abyss? Obviously, she knew who Xueji was referring to. It's no wonder I've never heard any news from him since the war started. He entered the Black Ink Abyss. In response, Xueji nodded gently. With a solemn expression, the Saintess asked, did he say anything else? Xueji replied, he said the bottom of the Black Ink Abyss is extremely dangerous. I initially wanted to accompany and assist him, but he said I would only die meaninglessly if I followed him. Therefore, he ordered me to stay here and make sure no one else could get near the Black Ink Abyss. Upon hearing that, the Saintess nodded. The masters from the spirit religion were puzzled while Sai Kong Nan felt even greater pressure on his hunched back as he asked, Holy Saintess, is there something else we're not aware of? After they defeated the Black Ink Cult and took charge of the entire world, they were ecstatic. However, it wasn't until this moment that they realized many things had happened in the background without them noticing. The Saintess had no idea how to explain it to them, so she could only say, I'm not at liberty to discuss this further. Since it's that person's order, we'd better wait here. What do you say, Holy Sun? The Holy Sun nodded repeatedly. You have a point, Big Sister Saintess. A furious Yu Daokai glared at the young Holy Sun. He wanted to tell the young man not to be easily fooled by a woman's beauty, for that would be dangerous. All the apostles had been killed at the bottom of the Black Ink Abyss as Yang Kai walked towards the profound source gate. Soon, he arrived at his destination. It was a mysterious-looking gate that stood in an empty space. The door was carved with intricate patterns, and every one of them seemed to be the essence of numerous grand Daos. As Yang Kai looked at the door, he suddenly realized something. The door wasn't something the humans could create, it was a precious treasure born alongside the universe. The primordial light and primordial darkness were born from this gate. The door wasn't tightly closed, but behind it, there seemed to be a dark power that was ready to burst out through the gaps at any moment. It was Mo's source. Since its source had been suppressed and sealed behind the profound source gate, it couldn't break free. However, the energy it released affected the entire Black Ink Abyss and gave birth to the Black Ink cult. Mu said that the darkness of human nature, which included slaughter, conspiracy, plots, and greed, could help strengthen Black Ink's strength. Therefore, after Mo developed sentience, its power increased rapidly. That was because there has never been a lack of a dark side in human nature. As Yang Kai looked at the profound source gate, he extended his hand and touched it. The next moment, his entire figure shook. A cold aura engulfed him in an instant and elicited the negative feelings he had suppressed at the bottom of his heart. He was oppressed and hunted down when he was weak, and when he was strong enough, he killed all of his opponents. All sorts of terrible memories swept through him like a tsunami. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5962, Turn of Events. Marshall Peak. When the cold aura engulfed Yang Kai, all of his horrible memories emerged from the bottom of his mind and impacted his soul. Darkness started spreading in his knowledge sea. It wasn't conspicuous at first, but it soon covered a large area and continued to expand. In just a short moment, the entire knowledge sea seemed to be covered in a layer of dark fog. On a 7-colored island, Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow saw some blurred images rolling in the dark fog. The images were all grey and gloomy, which were the unhappy memories of Yang Kai's life. The memories kept getting shattered as though they were devoured by the dark fog. As the dark fog's power increased, it became increasingly thick. Yang Peng, who had been confined to this place for a long time, exclaimed, "What's going on? Has Sir fallen into danger?" No one responded to him. Impacted by the external stimulant, the 7-colored island started shaking as the multicolored light around it became even brighter. However, before the soul-warming lotus could do anything, even more images emerged from the dark fog. Compared to the gloomy images earlier, the new ones were undoubtedly much brighter. Not long after these images appeared, they soon covered the entire knowledge sea. The light from these countless images penetrated the shackles of the darkness. After that, these images shattered and dissolved into the darkness. Following the integration of these bright images, the black fog quickly became thinner. In just a moment, it abruptly disappeared just like how it appeared all of a sudden earlier. Compared to the setbacks in Yang Kai's life, he had gone through far more happy experiences. When he was a young child, his parents would always take care of him. When he ventured into the outside world, he made many friends, and they gave him warmth. Moreover, his wives were still waiting for his return. No one was perfect, everyone carried darkness in their heart, but there was also light. If they couldn't look straight at the darkness, how were they supposed to embrace the bright side? Only irresolute people would be devoured by their dark side. Yang Kai's gaze was clear as he stood in front of the profound source gate and circulated his power, infusing it into the gate to refine it. At the same time, he was secretly shocked. Mu had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces and sealed them in 3,000 different universe worlds. In other words, the one before his eyes was only one of the 3,000 pieces. Moreover, it had been suppressed and sealed behind the profound source gate, so the energy it could release was insignificant. Nevertheless, this weak energy was enough to stimulate the dark side in his heart. Given his heritage as a Ninth Order Master, Yang Kai could quickly shake off such influence. However, the strongest cultivators in this world were only in the immortal ascension boundary. Once they were affected, none of them could regain their senses. Mu was right to say that unless she could take charge of the profound source gate, the birth of the Black Ink cult was inevitable. Nonetheless, Little 11th was by her side, so she couldn't go near the profound source gate. Otherwise, even the faint bit of source strength leaking out would have a huge impact on Little 11th. It would very likely integrate into his body, possibly even awakening him. Yang Kai slowly activated his power and patterns started lighting up around his palm and spread across the entire gate. It seemed that it wasn't difficult to refine this treasure. As he looked at the gate's transformation, Yang Kai realized that when all the patterns and symbols on the gate lit up, he would successfully refine it. The source behind the gate seemed to have detected something as it became violent all of a sudden. It started activating its power from the mysterious space behind the gate and kept crashing against it. Booming sounds were continuously heard. At the same time, a mysterious power started spreading through the gap in the gate. As expected, Mo had indeed left behind a hidden hand. Yang Kai was glad that he accepted Mu's advice and waited until the light spirit religion destroyed the black ink cult before he took action. Otherwise, an accident might have occurred. After a month of war, the black ink cult had been destroyed, but there were still some survivors. When some black ink cult masters realized that defeat was inevitable, they hurriedly hid somewhere to keep themselves safe. However, the moment the source strength behind the gate activated, the black ink cult masters, who had been hiding in different parts of the primordial world, seemed to have received some irresistible calling as they stepped out of their hiding places and dashed towards the black ink abyss as quickly as they could, black ink strength billowing from their figures. While on their way, the black ink strength around them thickened and allowed them to break through their limits, thus reaching higher realms. Nevertheless, there was a huge price to pay for such an unusual increase in power. Many black ink cult masters exploded while on their way, while those who survived saw their figures going through an irreversible transformation. In the meantime, the light spirit religion's soldiers broke into a commotion as well. When the disturbance was heard, the spirit religion's leaders were still confronting Xueji beside the black ink abyss. "What happened?" asked an order lord in shock. Li Fei Yu immediately went over to have a look. As the fire order lord, she was responsible for collecting information. Soon, she figured out what was going on. She returned and explained, "Some of the spirit religion members, who have been affected by black ink strength, have gone mad for some reason. Black ink strength has changed their nature, and they're now determined to enter the black ink abyss." It was a well-known fact that the black ink cult had planted some moles in the spirit religion. This was inevitable. After all, black ink strength was too strange, so it was difficult for anyone to put up their guard against it at all times. Moreover, in the past month, many spirit religion members had been contaminated by black ink strength. Since the weak black ink strength didn't have any noticeable impact, those from the spirit religion decided to put the matter aside for now. They would only examine every member after the dust settled. Much to their surprise, those disciples who had been affected by black ink strength were now transforming into entirely different people now. The cultivators, who were engulfed in black ink strength, madly charged towards the black ink abyss, causing a great upheaval. Li Fei Yu could not help but turn to look at the black ink abyss. Just now, Xueji said that a certain someone was inside the black ink abyss, which was where the black ink cult originated from. Could the turn of events have something to do with that person? Had he done something at the bottom of the black ink abyss that caused all this disturbance? As Li Fei Yu looked in the abyss direction, she was startled for a moment before she asked, "Where's Xueji?" Xueji, who stood in front of the black ink abyss earlier, was nowhere to be seen. With a solemn expression, the saintess replied, "Her 4 blood slaves have been badly affected by the black ink strength as well, so they plunged into the black ink abyss." Xueji chased after them. Hearing that, Li Fei Yu was astounded. Yu Daokai said grimly, "It seems that all those who have been affected by black ink strength, regardless of whether their temperaments have been changed before, are doomed this time." Xueji and her blood slaves were from the black ink cult, so they naturally had come into contact with black ink strength before. They had also cultivated in the black ink abyss in the past. The turn of events affected all those who had been corrupted by black ink strength. Therefore, Xueji and her blood slaves were not spared. Sai Kong Nan turned to look at the black ink abyss and said meditatively, "Something must have happened at the bottom." Then, he shifted his attention to the saintess. "Holy saintess, you just said someone is in the black ink abyss. Who is that person?" That was something the spirit religion masters were curious about. The bottom of the black ink abyss had always been a restricted area. Even those from the black ink cult had no idea what the bottom looked like, which went to show it was a dangerous place. Could anyone actually reach the bottom while maintaining their original nature? If they could find out who the person down there was, they would probably have an idea of what happened. Stop asking any further, order Lord Sai Kong. I can't explain it to you at this point. The saintess shook her head. Yu Dao Kai couldn't help but bellow, why are you still hiding it from us now, holy saintess? Given the current situation, regardless of who the person is, he can't possibly save himself. The saintess still shook her head and remained silent. Although she wasn't familiar with Yang Kai, she trusted the first-generation saintess unconditionally. Even if the turn of events was caused by Yang Kai, he must be able to survive. Just as Yu Dao Kai was about to say something, his expression changed all of a sudden as he turned to look at the depths of the black ink abyss where a powerful aura was rising rapidly. The next moment, a red figure shot up and landed on the spot where she stood earlier. She was none other than Xue Ji, who dove into the black ink abyss to pursue her blood slaves. Presently, she looked battered with wounds all over her body. It was apparent that she had gotten into an intense fight earlier, but her aura remained quite intimidating. After she landed on the ground, she shot Yu Dao Kai a look and said impassively, "My master is more powerful than you think. If you dare spout nonsense again, I'll kill you first." In an instant, Yu Dao Kai's expression turned gloomy. He was a peak immortal ascension boundary master and an order lord. Before today, even though there were countless masters in the world, no one could speak so casually about killing him. He had even exchanged moves with Yu Biuju before, and although he was defeated, he still managed to escape with his life. However, since it was Xue Ji who threatened him now, he didn't have the guts to refute her. If he offended this crazy woman, he didn't have the confidence to flee from her and survive. Xue Ji had returned to this place with an even more intimidating aura than before. They were so astonished that they were oblivious to the shocking information she revealed in her words. Li Fei Yu asked in shock, "Why are you all right?" Xue Ji couldn't help but roll her eyes. "What could happen to me? Everyone corrupted by black ink strength has lost their sanity. Why are you still safe?" Upon hearing that, Xue Ji finally came to her senses. She looked at her hands and felt the power within her. When she realized what happened, she said with a smile, "That's why I said my master is more powerful than you think." When the sudden change occurred, her blood slaves were instantly affected as they turned around and charged towards the black ink abyss. Realizing that something was off, Xue Ji hurriedly pursued them. Upon confirming that her blood slaves were going to hurt Yang Kai, she quickly decided to kill them, despite having spent years nurturing them, before she returned. Usually, even though she could kill 4 third-order Immortal Ascension Realm Masters, she would have to pay a huge price. Nevertheless, she was the one who nurtured the blood slaves, after all. She had planted a restriction in every one of them. Also, the blood slaves could no longer perform their strongest combined attack techniques after losing their sanity. As such, even though it took Xue Ji some effort, she still managed to kill them all. Martial Peak. Martial Peak, Chapter 5963, If we are destined to meet again, we will. Martial Peak. When Xue Ji killed the blood slaves, she didn't read too much into it. It wasn't until she heard Li Fei use words that she realized something bigger was going on. Everyone who had been corrupted by black ink strength, regardless of whether their temperament had been contorted before, was doomed this time. The bottom of the black ink abyss seemed to be deathly attractive to them as they charged towards it, no matter the cost. The blood slaves were the best examples. All 4 blood slaves had been completely loyal to Xue Ji, and she had even planted a restriction on each of them to ensure that. Still, they betrayed her without hesitation just now. However, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with her. She could feel that some black ink strength remained in her body, probably what she had previously refined in the black ink abyss. Nevertheless, the black ink strength seemed to have been suppressed by some different power, so it didn't have any impact on her. That power that suppressed the black ink strength was coming from her blood. It could only be the power she derived from her master's blood. While they spoke, the disturbance among the spirit religion's soldiers intensified. More and more beast-like growls were heard. The cultivators, whose temperaments had been corrupted by black ink strength, lost their sanity and turned into black ink disciples. Despite his age, the young holy son showcased his resoluteness as he ordered, "Order lords, please return and form a defense line. We can't let those who have been affected by black ink strength enter the black ink abyss, no matter what." He had no idea who the person that the saintess had mentioned was, nor did he know what that person had done at the bottom of the black ink abyss. However, he knew what he was supposed to do now. Following his order, the Order Lords came to their senses while the saintess looked approvingly at the Holy Sun, who appeared pleased with this acknowledgement. Yu Dao Kai looked coldly at him and thought that young men could be easily fooled by beautiful women. They had no idea that power was the best thing in the world. Despite being exasperated, he dashed forward and gathered his subordinates together as per the Holy Sun's request. The other Order Lords started taking action as well, and soon, a war broke out. Following a month of the war, many people from the spirit religion had been corrupted by black ink strength. They were initially comrades, but they had to kill each other now. Many people didn't have the heart to do it, but the black ink disciples held nothing back. Since they were determined to enter the black ink abyss, they would do their best to remove any obstacles in their way. Upon realizing that these black ink disciples couldn't be saved, those from the spirit religion no longer held back. Everyone fell into a frenzy, and soon, the disturbance subsided. Just as they thought the turmoil was coming to an end, masters that were engulfed in black ink strength charged towards them from all directions. They were the black ink cult masters who had been hiding in different places. After they received the calling from the source strength in the black ink abyss, they came forward and revealed themselves. An even more intense war broke out. The spirit religion soldiers didn't have the heart to hurt their comrades, but they wouldn't go easy on those from the black ink cult. Xueji just stood silently beside the black ink abyss and listened to the sounds of the slaughter. She had to execute Yang Kai's command by killing anyone who tried to enter the black ink abyss. The upheaval lasted for several days. It wasn't until the last batch of black ink cultists were killed that peace was restored. No one cheered or felt happy this time. The spirit religion soldiers were exhausted as they lay on the ground, and as they looked at the corpses of their slain comrades, they felt sorrowful. The spirit religion masters gathered in front of the black ink abyss again. With Yu Dao Kai in front of everyone, the Order Lords mounted pressure on Xueji. The sudden turn of events made them realize the importance of the black ink abyss. They had to find out what was hidden at the bottom of the abyss. Only by doing so could they prevent the same thing from happening again. However, Xueji never gave in and her murderous intent permeated the air. The atmosphere beside the black ink abyss grew more intense by the day. The stalemate lasted for a while, but just as hostilities were about to break out, Xueji appeared joyful all of a sudden and looked down at the black ink abyss. At the same time, all of them could feel an aura rising rapidly from the depths of the black ink abyss. What surprised them was that the power of the aura even surpassed that of Xueji. The next moment, a figure landed in front of Xueji, who went over and greeted the man, "Master." Yang Kai nodded and gave her an approving look, but he raised his hand to stop her from approaching him. Presently, the space around him had been contorted as a repulsive force surrounded him. There seemed to be a mysterious power that was trying to destroy him. "It's you." All the Order Lords were flabbergasted. All of them had seen Yang Kai before. When he entered the city, all the citizens went over to welcome him. He had the people's support and the blessing of the world's will. At that time, they regarded him as a fake holy son. Back then, in the ancient grounds, he couldn't pass the test left behind by the first-generation saintess and had been corrupted by black ink strength. As such, 3 Order Lords joined forces and killed him, after which Li Fei Yu dealt with his corpse. No one had expected that not only was this guy alive, but he had also dived into the depths of the black ink abyss. As the Order Lords recalled what the saintess and Xueji had said, they couldn't help but take a look at the saintess. They seemed to have realized something. If anyone else had emerged from the depths of the abyss at this point, these spirit religion masters wouldn't have let him off. After all, they had no idea whether this guy had been affected by black ink strength. However, at that moment, Yang Kai's aura was so terrifying that no one had the guts to say anything. "What's happening, Master?" Xueji's face paled. As she looked at the contorted space around Yang Kai and felt its destructive aura, she realized something was off. Yang Kai flashed a smile at her. "Every world has its limits. The limit of this world is the immortal ascension boundary. If anyone's power exceeds this limit, they will be repelled by this world itself." Xueji was surprised as she realized what the man meant, Master, do you mean you've reached the realm above the immortal ascension boundary? Yang Kai replied with a smile, there is no end to the martial Tao. To true masters, the realm above the immortal ascension boundary is just the starting point. Then, he turned to look at the Saintess. I've settled all the problems at the bottom of the black ink abyss. However, some black ink strength remains. It would be best if you arranged some arrays here to prevent anyone from coveting that black ink strength. The Saintess nodded. Don't worry, sir. I will handle everything. Following that, Yang Kai looked in Dawn City's direction and put on a smile. I have to leave. A flustered Xueji asked, where are you going, master? Please bring me with you. Yang Kai's words had a significant impact on her. She was originally from the Black Ink cult, and only sided with Yang Kai after the latter subdued her. Now that the entire Black Ink cult had been destroyed though, and all the Black Ink cult masters who had been hiding in different parts of the world had come out and been killed, it could be said that she was the only one in the world who still had some of the Black Ink cult's traces. The Black Ink cult had become history in this independent world, and there wouldn't be any remnants of their presence just a few hundred years later. Therefore, she didn't want to stay here on her own. As long as she could follow Yang Kai, she was willing to serve him. Yang Kai shook his head, I have a mission to complete, so I can't bring you with me. Xueji's expression instantly dimmed as she pouted and fell silent. She looked like a young girl who had just been abandoned. Yang Kai smiled helplessly, all right. I'll give you a task. Xueji immediately appeared elated, anything, master. With a solemn expression, Yang Kai said, stand guard here and kill anyone who tries to enter the Black Ink abyss. Xueji replied seriously, yes, master. The next moment, she put on a cheeky smile, since I've taken on this task, do I get a reward? Yang Kai shot her a glare before flicking his fingers, after which a drop of golden blood shot towards her. Xueji's eyes brightened in an instant as she quickly gulped it down. She could tell that this blood droplet was very different from the ones given by Yang Kai in the past. It was a drop of his blood essence. Yang Kai then spoke to her in secret, I've left behind a restriction, so you'd better not be impatient when you refine it, otherwise, you'll explode. Hearing that, Xueji nodded repeatedly. The repulsion of the world's will was increasingly conspicuous, and the destructive storm around Yang Kai made everyone's face turn pale. All the masters at the scene didn't have the confidence to survive in such a storm, but Yang Kai remained calm and collected, which showed how formidable he was. Realizing something, Xueji hurriedly asked, will I see you again, master? Yang Kai looked at her and replied, if we are destined to meet again, we will. The next moment, a clap of thunder was heard and Yang Kai turned into a ray of light that shot into the sky. The masters watched as a crack appeared in the sky. The ray of light shot into the crack and disappeared. The destructive aura also disappeared at the same time, as though it had never been there. As the crack closed, the area beside the Black Ink abyss fell silent. All of them were covered in cold sweat, and as they recalled Yang Kai's words, they were astonished. It was the young holy son who broke the silence by asking, so, was he the savior described in the prophecy? Although he was young and inexperienced, he wasn't a fool. When he saw Yang Kai earlier, he realized something. Am I the fake holy son? He pointed at his nose. The Order Lords exchanged glances, realizing the problem as well. The Saintess looked at the holy son and replied with a smile, he's indeed the savior described in the prophecy, but you're the spirit religion's holy son. After a month of the war, the holy son had gained the recognition of the spirit religion members. Everyone who had taken part in the crusade would only acknowledge him to be the holy son. The young holy son scratched his head, all right, I'll be the holy son, then. However, it's inappropriate that no one is aware of who the real savior is. The Saintess suggested, you can slowly spread his contributions in the future so that the members will understand that he had made a move in secret and saved this world. The holy son nodded, that'll work. However, we'd better deal with the most pressing issue now. Before that person left, he told us to suppress and seal the Black Ink abyss. How do you want to do it, holy son? Asked the Saintess. The holy son turned to look at Xueji. Do you want to join the spirit religion? Xueji was still feeling the power of the blood essence when she heard that. Surprised, she asked in confirmation, do you want me to join the spirit religion? Yes. We share the same goal now, and that person told you to stand guard at the black ink abyss before he left. In that case, I think it'd be better if we could work together. What do you say? Xueji looked seriously at him and saw her alluring figure reflected in the holy sun's clear gaze. After a moment, she smiled and nodded, fine. Rather than being all on her own, she felt that this outcome wasn't too bad. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5964, The Second World, Marshall Peak. Mu's house was located on the periphery of Dawn City. When the world started repelling Yang Kai and the worlds will formed a destructive storm, Mu detected something and looked in the black ink abyss direction. Has he succeeded? It was quicker than she had expected. It seemed that her several million years of waiting were worth it, for Yang Kai might be able to achieve the goal she had left behind. Presently, little 11th was asleep on her lap. As though having a nightmare, he had been trembling for a while as a myriad of expressions came over him. Sometimes, he was full of murderous intent, and sometimes, he appeared furious. His figure was already soaked in sweat. Just then, a clap of thunder sounded. Little 11th awakened in shock and looked dazedly at Mu, then, he pouted and started crying. Did you have a nightmare? Mu asked softly. Little 11th nodded repeatedly. In the dream, I saw you abandoning me, and you were getting further away from me. Mu placated him with a smile. It's just a dream. Little 11th sniffled and snuggled up to Mu. He held the woman's thighs tightly and said childishly, You mustn't abandon me, sixth sister. I'll have no one I can call family anymore. Mu patted his back. Don't worry. I'll never abandon you, and I'll always keep you company. Of course, when you become an adult one day, perhaps you'll find me annoying and run away. That will never happen. Little 11th frowned as he realized something was off. He then said, I think I've fallen ill, sixth sister. I'm feeling unwell. You'll feel better after some sleep. Little 11th replied and found a comfortable position before dozing off. As Yang Kai traversed the void, he could feel a drawing force pointing out the direction for him. The drawing force wasn't the repulsive force from the primordial world, instead, it was a force that came from the space-time river itself. He instantly realized that it was something left behind by Mu. After he refined the profound source gate in the primordial world and sealed one piece of Mu's source, he had to leave for the next world. He was in a hurry. Undoubtedly, Mu's space-time river was powerful, and the flow of time in these universe worlds was different from that of the outside world. However, the longer he stayed here, the more likely an accident would happen outside. It seems I have to hurry up. Then, he emptied his mind and soon found a closed door in his knowledge sea. It was the profound source gate that he had refined at the bottom of the black ink abyss. He didn't expect the gate to enter his knowledge sea after he refined it, however, after giving it some thought, he realized it wasn't surprising that he could keep it in his knowledge sea. The profound source gate was a treasure born alongside the heavens and earth, after all. It would be awkward if he had to carry the gate and move around. He already had the soul-warming lotus in his knowledge sea, and now there was the profound source gate. The sight was somewhat awkward. On the seven-colored island, Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow exchanged glances with helpless expressions. This couldn't be helped. The moment the profound source gate abruptly appeared in the knowledge sea, Yang Peng became agitated. As his entire figure was engulfed in a cold aura, he soon went mad. The eerie gate seemed able to elicit the darkness in human nature. Yang Peng originally came from the Black Ink cult, so he couldn't be considered a good and kind person. Since he had done so many terrible things in life, it was only natural that he had a vast dark side in his heart. After his body was destroyed by Yang Kai, his soul avatar was trapped in the latter's knowledge sea. He had been cooperative and provided a lot of useful information, and Yang Kai didn't intend to kill him anyway, so letting him stay in the knowledge sea was just a minor matter. Nevertheless, after his dark side was amplified by the profound source gate, he lost his sanity. Left with no choice, Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow could only destroy his soul avatar. Certainly, they weren't feeling good about the whole affair. They finally had a new neighbor to talk to, but they hadn't lived long. That was why they felt helpless. At that moment, Fang Tianci and Thunder Shadow stood on the seven-colored island in silence and refrained from looking at the profound source gate. After they took a look at the gate earlier, they realized some horrible memories from the past sprang back into their minds, but the effect could be negated by ignoring the gate. Meanwhile, once Yang Kai left the primordial world, he glanced back and realized it was nowhere to be seen. He only saw some grains of sand that moved with the flow of the river. This reminded him of what he saw in the depths of the infinite river inside the universe furnace back then. There were similar grains of sand at the bottom of the infinite river as well, however, that wasn't sand. Each grain was a universe world. After the grains of sand were spurted from the universe furnace, they would reveal their true form. Every grain of sand was equivalent to a universe world. That was the wonder of chaos evolving into the 10,000 grand Daos. The drawing force intensified as Yang Kai traversed the spacetime river and soon approached another grain of sand. That was the second world he had to enter. Without hesitation, Yang Kai adjusted his direction and plunged straight into the world. Soon, the aura of a universe world came right at his face. Just like what happened when he entered the primordial world previously, he abruptly appeared in a universe world, after which his figure plummeted. Since he had some experience now, he immediately examined his cultivation. He was relieved that even though his cultivation had been suppressed greatly, he was still in the immortal ascension boundary. Hurriedly, he circulated his power and stabilized himself mid-air. As he looked around, he realized it was a barren land with no one around. Moreover, he found the world strange as it was filled with a primitive aura. He felt as if he had barged into the river of time and returned to an ancient era. Wu Kuang, can you detect Mu's whereabouts? Yang Kai asked. Previously in the primordial world, it was thanks to Wu Kuang that they managed to find Mu. Although he was only a thread of consciousness, Wu Kuang was still connected to his true body. Furthermore, he was in charge of the primordial heaven's source grand restriction where the spacetime river was hidden. Therefore, if Mu wanted to give them any directives, she had to do it through Wu Kuang. However, the moment Yang Kai finished his words, he arched his brow, for he had already detected something. He turned to look in a particular direction and put on a helpless smile. I guess I've been overly worried. Since Mu wanted Yang Kai to move around different universe worlds to suppress and seal Mo's source pieces, she was naturally well prepared. In the primordial world, Mu must have left a mark on him. Therefore, the moment he arrived in this world, he immediately detected something in a particular direction. It must be over there. He then charged towards that place. In the meantime, a figure was seated with her legs crossed in the wilderness. She had been waiting there for countless years, and she had no idea how much longer she would have to wait. She wasn't even certain if all the waiting would matter. All the same, even though innumerable years had passed, she had never forgotten about her goal. She was located in a mountain valley that was surrounded by 8 mountains. All these mountains were magnificent and connected. In the mountain valley, there was an abstruse grand array. In the middle of the grand array, there was a dark rock that exuded an evil aura. The grand array, and even the mountains themselves seemed to be suppressing the dark rock. With the help of the mountain range and the grand array, this place was where the entire universe world's power was gathered. Unlike Mu in Dawn City, this woman was undoubtedly more haggard, as though she hadn't gotten any rest for a very long time. The moment Yang Kai barged into this independent world, she opened her eyes and lifted her sword from her lap. The weapon then turned into a ray of light and shot off into the distance. Following that, a beastly growl was heard from behind her. A huge ancient beast collapsed to the ground, and its blood dyed the ground red. The mountain valley was covered with huge skeletons, and every one of them belonged to an ancient beast. After so many years, she had lost count of how many ancient beasts she had killed. The sword returned and quietly landed in front of her without a drop of blood on it. Then, she slowly turned to look in a different direction. Her figure was stiff, as though she hadn't moved like this for a long time. This simple movement represented several 100,000 years of waiting. She put on a smile, for she could feel that all the waiting was finally worth it. In the distance, a figure was rushing towards her. The figure had a bit of her aura on him. It was thanks to the resonance between the shadows which allowed the newcomer to identify the direction he should head towards. He landed on the ground and exchanged glances with the woman. As Yang Kai looked at how haggard the shadow appeared, he couldn't help feeling heartbroken. Feeling a lump in his throat, he was unable to speak for a moment. A while later, he saluted the woman and said, "Junior Yang Kai greets senior." Mu replied with a smile, "No need for formalities. You must have met me before." In response, Yang Kai nodded. Mu went on to say, "Then, you should know why you're here." While Yang Kai looked at the dark rock, Mu continued, "There are no humans in this world, only some ancient beasts that roam around. As such, you don't have to deal with any schemes or plots. Just move the dark rock away and use the profound source gate to suppress it." In the primordial world, it took Yang Kai a lot of effort to refine the profound source gate and suppress Mo's source piece, so much to his surprise, his task in this independent world was rather simple. As though seeing through his thoughts, Mu explained with a smile, "Every universe world is different. Perhaps you'll come across similar situations again, but there will also be times when you have to work hard to achieve your goals. Go ahead, I've been waiting for far too long." "Yes," Yang Kai replied respectfully. He knew that the task was simple because of Mu's efforts. He walked up to the dark rock and pushed it away. There was a dark pit on the ground, and the howls of wind could be heard coming from it. Following that, a cold aura was approaching rapidly, as though it was coming from the depths beneath the ground. Yang Kai raised his hands before pressing them down at the pit and shouting, "Open!" A mysterious gate appeared above the pit, and with an injection of Yang Kai's strength, a portal opened up. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5965, See you soon, Marshall Peak. A horrifying power was felt surging inside the pit. The howls of wind were like its growls as it kept crashing into the profound source gate. The source piece, which had been suppressed and sealed here for a long time, must have realized that something was off, so it was trying to resist. Nevertheless, its efforts were futile. If it was the complete source, the gate wouldn't have been a threat to it, but it was only a small piece. The profound source gate's suppressive power spread. At the same time, a powerful drawing force was felt coming from behind the gate. After the source piece was lured out, it lost the power to resist and disappeared into the gap. The gate closed once again, after which Yang Kai kept it inside his knowledge sea. This time, it didn't take him much effort to suppress and seal Mo's source piece, but he knew it was all thanks to Mu. Just by looking at the skeletons in the valley, he knew that the woman must have waited here for countless years and killed all the ancient beasts that coveted black ink strength. If not for Mu's efforts, Yang Kai would have been attacked by ancient beasts corrupted by black ink strength the moment he arrived in this world, making his situation quite perilous. As Mu watched the source getting sealed, she finally appeared relieved. She got to her feet slowly. As Yang Kai looked at her in puzzlement, she extended her hand and pressed it against the man's chest. After their eyes met, Mu said, "I've completed my task, so I'll leave the rest to you, Junior. The human race's future hinges on you, so you must do your best to not fail this mission." As she spoke, her figure faded rapidly. It was as though she was about to disappear from this world. As that happened, Yang Kai could feel a warm stream entering his body through the woman's palm. "Senior," with a conflicted expression, Yang Kai had no idea what to say. "This is the price I have to pay for sending you away," Mu replied with a smile. Gradually, her figure was gone. As her power engulfed Yang Kai, he shot into the sky and turned into a ray of light. A crack appeared in the sky just then. The ray of light passed through it and disappeared. The familiar drawing force appeared again and led Yang Kai to the next world. He pressed his hand against his chest as his emotions undulated in his heart. Unlike the primordial world, the second world was one where only ancient beasts existed. He didn't do much as he only summoned the profound source gate and sealed Mo's source piece. Mu had cleared all the danger and obstacles for him. It was the result of countless years of perseverance. The entire time, Yang Kai had only briefly talked to Mu. There was no doubt she was a kind-hearted person. She devised this plan millions of years ago and let her shadows stay in different universe worlds to carry it out. She had been on her own all this time, waiting for a future that might not even come. In the end, she didn't even make any demands or requests, she simply told Yang Kai to do his best and try not to fail. Even so, he didn't give her a definitive reply. He couldn't help but blame himself. Mu had been doing all this selflessly, and she didn't need anyone to thank her. Nevertheless, Yang Kai could give her hope. While he was lost in his thoughts, the aura of the third world came right at his face. As usual, he followed the faint guidance and successfully found Mu, who had been waiting in a desolate place for countless years. Before Mu could say anything, Yang Kai muttered, "Senior, all the darkness will be dispelled by the light one day. The human race will have a bright future. All your contributions and efforts over the eons will be worth it." Mu stared fixedly at him with her mouth slightly open. With a confident expression, Yang Kai flashed a smile at her. Mu put on a smile as well. In just a short time, she understood everything and nodded, "Good." She turned around and pointed in a particular direction. "Mo's sauce piece is over there. Go ahead." "Yes." Yang Kai cupped his fist and strode towards the place. He soon sealed the sauce piece and returned. Mu walked up to him and pressed her hand against his chest before her figure faded. Yang Kai kept all the sorrow to himself and put on a bright smile. "I'll see you soon, Senior." At the last moment, Mu flashed a smile at him. "See you soon." The next instant, Yang Kai shot into the sky. As he moved around different universe worlds, he made use of the profound source gate's power and sealed the pieces of Mo's source. Every time Yang Kai arrived in a new world, he would immediately say the same thing to Mu, who would give him the same response. As they met and parted ways repeatedly, it was like a never-ending cycle. In general, things went smoothly. In most of the worlds, Mu had cleared all the obstacles for him, so he just had to find her shadow and summon the profound source gate to seal Mo's source piece. In truth, in the primordial world, if not for the fact that Mu had to keep Little 11th by her side, she could have taken control of the profound source gate as well. However, due to Little 11th, Mu in the primordial world couldn't go near the profound source gate. After all, Mo's source piece had been suppressed behind the gate. An accident might happen if Little 11th approached the gate. Mo's source gave birth to the Black Ink cult. As such, Mu had to establish the light spirit religion to oppose it. In that independent world, there wasn't much help that Mu could provide in terms of aid. Moreover, the Black Ink cult had developed rapidly. As such, it took Yang Kai quite some effort before he settled everything in the primordial world. Nevertheless, things wouldn't always go smoothly. When Yang Kai entered the 60th universe world, he realized that something was off. The entire world was filled with black ink strength. All the living creatures in this world had been corrupted by black ink strength and turned into black ink disciples. When Yang Kai followed the guidance and found Mu, she was covered in blood while running for her life. This couldn't be helped, as everyone in that world was hunting her down. Yang Kai had no idea how long the situation had persisted, but when he found her, she was in a terrible state. After saving Mu from the black ink disciples, Yang Kai found a quiet place and stopped in his tracks. He asked, "What's going on, Senior?" Mu explained, "Something went wrong with the sealing location. Too much of Mo's source strength leaked out and it has affected far too many beings. They shattered the seal and let Mo's source piece break free." Upon hearing her explanation, Yang Kai finally realized why this world was filled with black ink strength. Mo's source piece had broken free from its shackles. The darkness in the humans of this world could no longer be hidden in front of black ink strength. Everyone in this world had been affected and turned into black ink disciples. "Do you know where the source piece is, Senior?" Yang Kai asked. Realizing his intention, Mu shook her head. "There's no point looking for it. Since you've started sealing Mo's source piece, speed is essential. Give up on this world and head to the next one." Saying so, she tried to get to her feet, but due to her injuries, she was unable to do so. Yang Kai hurriedly squatted in front of her. Mu pressed her hand against his chest. They could hear the sounds of footsteps as many living creatures were rapidly approaching them. "Remember, if there's a similar situation in any world, abandon it at once. There's no point trying to achieve your goal every time because you won't be able to seal all the pieces of its source regardless." Yang Kai nodded in response. Back in the primordial world, Mu's first shadow told him that she had divided Mo's source into 3,000 pieces. Every time Yang Kai sealed a piece of its source, Mo would be alerted. When it reached a certain point, Mo would awaken and retrieve all the remaining source pieces. Therefore, Yang Kai couldn't seal all 3,000 pieces. In that case, it would be wiser to give up on this world and head to the next one where it would be easier to seal the source piece. I understand. Yang Kai nodded. Also, my shadows might not be alive in all the universe worlds. You might enter a world where I'm not around, but you don't have to worry. The previous shadows had left behind enough power for you, so you can leave for the next world anytime you want. Yang Kai nodded again. The footsteps were getting closer as they felt flaring energy fluctuations. The black ink disciples around them were running out of patience as they were ready to make a move. Mu's figure vanished into thin air, after which Yang Kai shot into the sky, leaving the black ink disciples growling on the ground. He set off on his journey and traversed the space-time river again. He repeatedly entered different worlds and sealed the pieces of the source. 100, 200, 300. Yang Kai kept count in his mind. As the number of the pieces he sealed increased, he could feel the situation worsening. Every time he sealed a piece of Mo's source, Mo would be disturbed. When it finally realized the severity of the matter, it would awaken. Yang Kai had no idea what the limit was, but he knew he was getting closer to it. What made him feel helpless was that there were now more and more worlds with difficult situations. The first time he came across a problem was when he reached the 60th world. The second time was after he sealed the 100th piece, and the third time was around the 130th piece. The intervals were getting shorter. The universe worlds within Mu's spacetime river all had different world principles, therefore, the strengths of the living creatures in these worlds varied greatly. However, her guidance seemed to be leading Yang Kai from the weakest to the strongest ones. Initially, the limit of the martial Tao in the universe worlds was only the immortal ascension boundary, but gradually, it became the transcendent realm, then the saint realm, the saint king realm, the Tao source realm, and eventually the emperor realm. As the living creatures in those worlds became stronger, it became more difficult for Yang Kai to achieve his goal. After all, Mu's shadow was on her own in most worlds. The powerful creatures were naturally attracted to Mo's source strength, and once too many of them gathered together, even Mu's shadow couldn't stop them. Yang Kai followed Mu's advice. Every time he came across a fallen world, he would give up on it at once. Nevertheless, he would always look for Mu and integrate her last bit of power into his body. He wasn't after Mu's power, he just wanted to bring as much of her away as possible. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5966, Rescuing the Suppressing Black Ink Army. Marshall Peak. As Yang Kai was swimming through Mu's spacetime river, a great battle had erupted outside the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. After dealing with the Black Ink Clan Reinforcement Army, Yang Kai rushed ahead to investigate the situation at the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction, while the Crusade Force was a step behind since they had to clean up the aftermath as well as rest and recover. But it was only a few days before the Crusade Force set off as well. Through the space arrays set up by the Void Guard, the army was able to rapidly advance and soon reached the edge of the Spiritless Land. This was where the last Universe Temple was located. Something unexpected had happened at the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction a few years back. The suppressing Black Ink Army was swallowed up into the Grand Restriction and a large number of Black Ink clansmen poured out from the opening. The Void Guard could not set up a space array directly outside the Grand Restriction as it would simply be courting death. At the edge of the Spiritless Land, the army regrouped and a few days later, it set sail towards the Primordial Heavens Source Grand Restriction. After a month, the army arrived at the outer perimeter of the Grand Restriction, where a large battle immediately broke out. This was a war launched with all the forces the human race possessed, with millions of human soldiers fighting while being led over by 39th Order Masters. Originally, there were far fewer 9th Order Masters on the human race side. Including Yang Kai, there were 10 of them before the attack on the No-Return Pass. However, the successful battle at the No-Return Pass provided a breakthrough opportunity for many rising stars, many of whom succeeded in advancing. 23 people attempted to break through, and the outcome was that 3 failed while 20 succeeded. As a result, the 9th Order Masters reached the 30 mark. Afterwards, more Masters broke through to the 9th Order as well. Now, there were more than 30 9th Order Masters in the Crusade Force. Thousands of years ago, Through a series of devastating losses, culminating in the Barren Territory War, the veteran Ninth Order Masters were decimated until only Xiao Xiao and Wu Qing remained. After several thousand bitter years passed though, the human race had finally restored some of its foundation. More than 30 Ninth Order Masters, millions of soldiers, and powerful warships filled the battlefield. The power of the entire human race had gathered here today. However, the Black Ink clan was not to be underestimated either. The primordial heavens source Grand Restriction had been around for millions of years. During these years, Black Ink's strength increased constantly, but it had reached a limit. Even if it kept increasing, it would be difficult to break through the Grand Restriction. Thus, much of the Black Ink strength accumulated had been used to create more Black Ink clansmen. One could say that within the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction, the Black Ink clan's forces had already accumulated to a terrifying number. If Mu had not brought out her hidden hand to put Mo to sleep back then, the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction would most likely have been destroyed and the Black Ink clan could have swept over the entire universe. It was Mu who gave the human race a final chance, allowing them to create the current situation. Currently, the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction was still under Wu Kuang's control. Even though the opening in the Grand Restriction had expanded significantly, it still had a limit, which restricted the speed of the Black Ink clansmen's escape. Furthermore, royal lords still found it incredibly difficult to pass through. If they forced their way out, it would severely damage their foundation, which had been proven by past attempts. When the Crusade force arrived at the Grand Restriction, a large army of Black Ink clansmen had already gathered outside, numbering over 100 million. Though there were no royal lords among them, there were still plenty of pseudo-royal lords. Compared with the immense Black Ink clan army, the human race army appeared minuscule. When the war broke out, the human race's forces were far inferior in number to the Black Ink clan. However, relying on the experienced army which had survived through countless battles, they coordinated with each other and made use of all their advantages to fight. Even if they could not gain the upper hand, they still wouldn't appear weak in front of their enemies. From afar, the human race army looked like a small snake slithering agilely around a giant python, constantly tearing at the latter's body. The entire void was filled with the corpses of the Black Ink clansmen, and Black Ink strength released from them had condensed together to form massive Black Ink clouds. Each Ninth Order Master was going all out to slaughter the pseudo-royal lords. Even the Eighth Order Masters were unwilling to appear weak. Together, they got into battle formations and charged fearlessly at their enemies. At the Grand Restriction's opening, the Black Ink clansmen kept pouring out to reinforce their army. However, what shocked them all was how the speed of their reinforcements couldn't keep up with the speed of the slaughter. The number of Black Ink clansmen gathered outside the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction was still steadily decreasing. The morale of the human race army grew higher and higher. However, Mi Jinglun, who was standing by at the command center of the human race army, did not show any joy on his face. He knew that this was only the beginning of the war. So far, he had not seen any royal lords make a move yet, and through his communication with Wu Kuang, he also knew of Yang Kai's whereabouts and why the royal lords were unable to leave the Grand Restriction. Currently, he was facing a dilemma. Even though the suppressing Black Ink army was trapped in the Grand Restriction and they were safe for the time being with Wu Kuang's help, countless royal lords were searching for the suppressing Black Ink army's whereabouts within the Grand Restriction. Once the suppressing Black Ink army's tracks got exposed, their survival chances inside the Grand Restriction would become null. Wu Kuang had the ability to send the suppressing Black Ink army out of the Grand Restriction, but he had not done so before because of the gathered Black Ink clan army. Even if he were to send them out, it would be like sending a flock of lambs to a tiger's den. Instead, it was better to let the suppressing Black Ink army to continue hiding inside the Grand Restriction where he could look after them. However, now that the Crusade force had arrived, the suppressing Black Ink army had an escape route. As long as they could coordinate with the Crusade force, sending them out of the Grand Restriction shouldn't be an issue. But doing so would create another problem. The opening in the Grand Restriction had been torn numerous times already, and each time, it caused irreparable damage to the Grand Restriction. In order to send the suppressing Black Ink army out, Wu Kuang would have to widen the gap in the Grand Restriction wider. Currently, The opening in the Grand Restriction could only allow Black Ink clansmen weaker than royal lords to pass through. If a royal lord were to force their way out, it would severely damage their strength, which was why they were all still hiding within the Grand Restriction. If the opening was expanded, then the royal lords might be able to enter and leave the Grand Restriction freely. There were a large number of royal lords within the Grand Restriction, and if they joined the battlefield, the pressure that the Crusade force would have to bear would be far more than what they were facing now, which meant that the intensity of the battle would also shoot straight up. This was the dilemma that Mi Jinglun was currently facing. The suppressing Black Ink army was in danger, but the cost of saving them was allowing royal lords to join the battlefield. However, an answer had already appeared in his heart. It was imperative that they save the suppressing Black Ink army, without even mentioning that the suppressing Black Ink army was composed of elites from the human race who had guarded the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction for over 2,000, there was also divine dragon Fu Guang among them. Many of Yang Kai's family members also belonged to the suppressing Black Ink army. For all these reasons, Mi Jinglun could not simply abandon them. If those who made great contributions were left to die, it would devastate the morale of the other soldiers. Of course, this was not the main reason. From another perspective, eliminating the Black Ink clan here would not directly affect the outcome of the war. No matter how many pseudo-royal lords they killed, or how many Black Ink clansmen were slaughtered, it would only weaken the Black Ink clan's strength but not shake their foundation. No one knew how many Black Ink clansmen were still hiding within the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction, not even Wu Kuang. The royal lords within the Grand Restriction were something that they would have to face sooner or later. While Wu Kuang still had control over the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction, it would be better to let out some royal lords and kill them, rather than allowing all of them to rush out all at once when the Grand Restriction inevitably collapsed. Based on the current situation, tearing open another opening in the Grand Restriction and allowing the royal lords to pass through was beneficial for them as it could alleviate some of the pressure in advance. Therefore, it was both morally and tactically sound to say that saving the suppressing Black Ink army was a necessary move. What was more, the human race still had some cards up their sleeves. They hadn't revealed all of their strength yet. With an idea in mind, Mi Jinglun and Wu Kuang discussed with each other and soon agreed on a plan. The movement of the human race army quickly changed. Originally, the army of millions remained mobile, using superior mobility to harass the Black Ink clan army since they were outnumbered by them. If they wanted to kill more enemies, they had to preserve their strength as much as possible. But now, the human race army suddenly gathered all their mass and recklessly charged towards the opening in the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction. The human masters took up position on the outer periphery, forming a defensive shield around the troops while the slightly weaker soldiers gathered at the center, enhancing the army's strength. The Black Ink clan had not in any way expected that the humans would suddenly change their strategy. Since the Black Ink clan's deployment was not as tight as their opponents, the human race army easily rammed through their lines and breached their defenses. The human race army advanced straight through the gaps, paving multiple paths towards the Grand Restriction's opening using the blood and remains of the Black Ink clansmen. Just as the Crusade force approached the opening, the Grand Restriction suddenly expanded like the mouth of a ferocious beast and spat out the suppressing Black Ink fortress. The timing was perfect. This success had to be credited to Wu Kuang's guidance. Without him, the suppressing Black Ink army would never be able to break out of the Grand Restriction at such an apt time. If they had done it too early, they would have been surrounded by the Black Ink clan army. Too late, and the human race army would have suffered heavy losses. The human race army coalesced into a single force and did not pause for even a moment. When the suppressing Black Ink army in control of the suppressing Black Ink fortress merged with the rest, they broke through the encirclement of the Black Ink clan and flew out. It was only once they reached a suitable distance that they reorganized their formations. The first clash between the human race army and Black Ink clan army ended with a resounding victory for the humans, but everyone knew that this was just the beginning. There was no time to rest on this battlefield. Once the fighting began, one should only seek to rest in death. Powerful auras emerged from the opening in the Grand Restriction soon after, and the vague silhouettes of many figures could be seen moving restlessly through the dark opening. Royal lords. The faces of all the masters of the human race became solemn since the number of figures visible was not by any means small. During their first crusade, the Black Ink clan had deployed some 300 royal lords in total, which was 3 times the number of Ninth Order masters at the time. Though not so many royal lords were gathered at the opening at this moment, there were at least 40 of them. Moreover, this was just the beginning. There would definitely be more royal lords who received the news and rushed out from the depths of the Grand Restriction soon. Mi Jing Lun had already tried to overestimate the Black Ink clan's heritage as much as possible, but he realized that he had still underestimated them in the end. The royal lords didn't immediately rush out of the Grand Restriction as they weren't sure if the current opening would allow them to pass through safely. After a brief hesitation, one of the royal lords stepped forward. As soon as he took a step forward, the royal lord appeared outside the Grand Restriction and stood frozen in place for a moment, clearly surprised at how smoothly he had passed through. Martial Peak. Martial Peak, Chapter 5967, Giant Spirit God Attacks, Martial Peak. Even more royal lords stepped through the opening soon after, the convergence of their heaven-shaking, earth-moving auras distorting the void around them. Each royal lord's gaze was fixed in the direction of the human race army, expressions of cruelty and bloodlust clear on their faces. On Pyongyang Pass, Mi Jing Lun looked on coldly before tossing out an object and shouting, "Go!" It was a round, bead-like object. Under the blessing of a Ninth Order master's strength, the small round bead quickly broke through the heavy blockade of the Black Ink clan and reached the royal lords. The gazes of the many royal lords were attracted to the round bead, but after examining it, they found that despite its peculiar appearance, it was not worth much attention. One of the royal lords threw a casual punch-out at the round bead, shattering it instantly. Suddenly, a surprise occurred that caught all the royal lords off guard. When the round bead was shattered, countless universe fragments appeared out of nowhere, as if they were the remains of the round bead. Strong space principle fluctuations followed suit before 2 massive figures that blocked the heavens and covered the earth appeared. Each royal lord's face was filled with shock. On the other hand, RDA and RR, who were prepared beforehand, did not give the royal lords any time to react, launching a violent attack at them as soon as they appeared. Utterly terrifying giant palms slapped down, and the royal lords were swept up by the force. As blood burst forth, the sound of bones breaking rang out. The royal lords all screamed, some in pain, others in panic. None of them had expected 2 giant spirit gods to enter the battlefield in this manner, so they immediately took heavy losses from this sudden attack. Several royal lords were instantly pulverized into mist, their auras simply vanishing from existence, while the survivors scattered in all directions. This was the trump card of the human race. During the battle at the No-Return Pass, RDA and RR were pinned down by the 2 Black Ink giant spirit gods and were unable to play a decisive role until Yang Kai teamed up with RDA to kill one of the Black Ink giant spirit gods, which greatly improved the human race's situation. But here, without Black Ink giant spirit gods to occupy them, the 2 giant spirit gods could perfectly demonstrate their terrifying might. The Black Ink clan did not have the means to stop such existences. Even a casual wave of a giant spirit god's hand was enough to smash anything it made contact with. Before the world bead they were hiding in was sent out, RDA and RR must have received instructions from Mi Jing Lun beforehand, so, when they saw the fleeing royal lords, RDA immediately went to pursue them while RR stayed behind, his massive figure acting as a barrier to block the opening in the Grand Restriction. At the opening, the royal lords who had received the news gathered nearby but hesitated to step out, each of them looking fearfully towards the towering figure in front of them. Though the giant spirit gods were incredibly powerful, their immense size also made them less agile, so even after chasing the fleeing royal lords for a while, RDA was unable to capture any of them. Annoyed, he turned around and charged into the Black Ink clan army's formation instead. What followed was like a tiger descending upon a flock of sheep. No matter how many Black Ink clan soldiers fought back, giving their all, even their very lives, their attacks were no different to a calm breeze to RDA. The massive army was instantly disrupted and broken apart. RDA was like a rampaging bull, trampling and crushing everything in his path. Giant gaps had now been opened in the Black Ink clan army, which was already somewhat scattered to begin with. Mi Jinglun was overjoyed when he saw this and immediately gave the order for the entire army to attack. The human race army, which had already rearranged their formations, charged the Black Ink clan, but unlike before, they only had to deal with the scattered sections that have been cut out from the main force. This greatly reduced the pressure on them. Just as the human race army was launching their second attack, 10 figures flew out from the suppressing Black Ink fortress, but they did not head to the battlefield and instead flew in the opposite direction. In the midst of a battle, actions like this would normally be enough to label them as deserters. However, everyone turned a blind eye to this and regarded it as a matter of course. This couldn't be helped as the auras of these masters were fluctuating wildly, a sign that they were about to break through. Zhao Yibai, Shu Yi, and Zhao Yue's figures were included amongst the 10. While members were being selected for the suppressing Black Ink army from the various armies, Mi Jinglun adhered to the principle of being lacking rather than excessive. That was because guarding the primordial heavens source grand restriction was not too dangerous a task then. They had divine dragon Fu Guang leading them and the cooperation of Wu Kuang, who had control over the grand restriction. All the suppressing Black Ink army had to do was intercept the Black Ink clansmen escaping from the opening. Taking the development of talent into consideration, Mi Jinglun had placed many promising candidates qualified to advance to the Ninth Order in the suppressing Black Ink army, distancing them from the brutality of the various great territory battlefields so they could focus on cultivating outside the primordial heavens source grand restriction in the hopes of advancing as soon as possible. Only, various changes occurred with the primordial heavens source grand restriction later on, leading to the increased danger outside of the grand restriction. No matter how incredible a strategist he was, Mi Jinglun could not predict all the changes that would happen over 2,000 years. Regardless, no one could deny that the suppressing Black Ink army was a force of elite masters. From the present situation alone, 10 masters out of the few thousand the suppressing Black Ink army was made up of were about to break through their limits and reach the Ninth Order open heaven realm. Such a proportion would be impossible to reproduce in any of the conventional armies. The 10 masters were currently only in the 8th Order open heaven realm, so even if they did put their lives on the line on this battlefield, the role they could play would not be significant. 8th Order masters were plentiful among the human race, so 10 more or 10 fewer would make no difference. However, if they were able to break through successfully and return as 9th Order masters, then even if only half of them succeed, the human race stood to gain 5 more 9th Order masters. Moreover, just from the recent situation alone, one could see that the success rate of the rising stars who have been nourished by the World Tree clones was surprisingly high when it came to ascending to the 9th Order, far surpassing the generations of the past. These 10 had actually reached their limits a long time ago, but they have been trapped in the primordial heavens source grand restriction and had not dared to break through so as to avoid exposing their whereabouts. The human race army charged, and even with the Black Ink clan going all out to resist, it was difficult for them to blunt this assault. The human race army brought an aura of death with them as they swept across the void, extinguishing the souls of countless Black Ink clansmen. Coupled with RDA's wanton rampage, unimaginable losses had been created for the Black Ink clan in just a short period of time, and the situation was only growing worse for them. The Black Ink clan finally realized that things had taken a dire turn. 2 giant spirit gods suddenly appeared and completely disrupted their formation, especially the giant spirit god who was guarding the opening. If they did not defeat him, the Black Ink clan would not be able to receive reinforcements, and with the current strength of the human race, those outside the grand restriction would eventually be wiped out. The royal lords who left the grand restriction quickly understood this and began to take action. Fortunately for them, the humans were unable to divide their forces at this moment, and even the Ninth Order masters dared not rashly move independently. If they were trapped in the vast sea of Black Ink clansmen, no one can guarantee that they would be able to escape alive. Under this situation, as long as the royal lords did not actively provoke the human race army, they would not need to engage the Ninth Order masters. On the other hand, the only one who could act recklessly in the midst of the Black Ink clan army, RDA, was not very bright. Once his blood began pumping, he simply moved towards wherever there were more foes to deal with, so it was difficult for the human race army to coordinate with him even if they wanted to. Seeing this, the royal lords regrouped and charged brazenly towards Naturally, Just 1 or 2 royal lords would not be a match for our. In fact, not even 10 of them would be able to deal with him. However, the number of royal lords that came out of the Grand Restriction was far greater than that. More than 40 royal lords charged towards our from all directions, and powerful secret techniques were launched one after another. Even a being as powerful as a giant spirit god staggered under such a heavy bombardment. Ara roared as he kicked and punched randomly, launching heaven-destroying, earth-shattering attacks one after another. However, most of these were dodged by the royal lords, and the few attacks that connected could not kill the royal lords with a single blow, only injuring them at most. This kind of swarming strategy was used by the Ninth Order Masters to deal with the Black Ink giant spirit god in years past, but now it was being utilized by the Black Ink clan. However, Ninth Order Masters were generally stronger than these inexperienced royal lords, so the humans needed just 20 or so Ninth Order Masters to hold off one Black Ink giant spirit god back, whereas the Black Ink clan required a far greater number of royal lords. Startled by R's roar, RDA finally regained some of his senses and turned to look towards the opening in the primordial heavens source Grand Restriction, rushing over in the next moment. When RDA arrived at the opening, more than 10 royal lords rushed out from it. The scene of 2 giant spirit gods teaming up to fight against more than 50 royal lords was extremely intense. Even more Black Ink clansmen gathered at the opening, among which were many royal lords as well. No one knew how many royal lords were hidden within the Grand Restriction. Their numbers within the dark space seemed to be endless, and they never stopped coming no matter how many were cut down. Many royal lords were tangled up with the 2 giant spirit gods, but neither side could defeat the other. Meanwhile, the Black Ink clan soldiers behind the opening found opportunities to flood out and join the massive battlefield. On Pyongyang Pass, Mi Jinglun's expression was solemn. The human race's only trump card had already been played, but apart from the initial success they gained against the Black Ink clan, it hadn't been able to play a decisive role. Right now, RDA and RR were blocking the opening together, but all they were really doing was delaying the speed of reinforcements coming out. If this continued, the situation would become unfavorable for the human race as more time passed. No matter what strategies he could come up with, the key to winning or losing a war was still the balance of power. Compared to the Black Ink clan, the human race army was undoubtedly an elite force, but their numbers were just too limited. Casualties were inevitable in war, and once their army reached a certain critical limit in their losses, their momentum would collapse. When that time came, the human race army's fate on this battlefield surrounded by enemies would be tragic. And this was merely a war against the Black Ink clan army. The Black Ink clan army were not the only ones the humans had to fight against. The main enemy they were up against was the one who stood behind them, Mo. It was an unbelievably terrifying foe. Was there any hope for victory in this war? Mi Jinglun had no idea. All he knew was that as a human, one had to give their all in battle in order to leave no regrets behind. And, through the information coming in from Wu Kuang's side, what Yang Kai was doing would also be a key for them. If Yang Kai could succeed, then the situation may not be as bad as he imagined it to be. Just like the giant spirit gods RDA and RR, Yang Kai was also a trump card for the human race. In the vast and desolate void, a faint light suddenly blossomed, quickly growing into a dazzling brightness that persisted for a long time before gradually subsiding. A graceful figure stood quietly in the void. She opened her eyes, revealing a pensive expression, as if she had vaguely understood something. It's time to end this, once and for all. Saying so, a pair of glistening and beautiful wings suddenly spread out on her back. With a gentle flap of her wings, she shot off, breaking through the barriers of space in an instant. Marshall Peak. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5968, Long Journey, Marshall Peak. For several months, the battlefield was a bloodbath. The human race soldiers continued to weave through the battlefield, harvesting the lives of Black Ink clansmen. Their charge was unimpeded at first, but as more and more royal lords left the Grand Restriction, the pressure on the humans grew stronger and stronger. RDA and RR were still blocking the opening of the Grand Restriction, but they could not stop all of the Black Ink clansmen, and when they were surrounded and attacked by dozens of royal lords at once, there would eventually be leaks in their blockade, and every time that happened, a large number of Black Ink clansmen would swarm out of the Grand Restriction. Many of the Black Ink clansmen who were unable to escape the circle of battle were caught in it and were annihilated without even a single bone left behind, but many more escaped unharmed to support their brethren on the battlefield. The entire void was flooded with rich Black Ink strength and bodies, which may be fine for the Black Ink clan, but for the humans, such an environment was brutal. Since the soldiers were constantly consuming purifying Black Ink pills, their medicinal efficacies were falling steadily. Ordinarily, the medicinal efficacies of a single purifying Black Ink pill would last for a few days, but after a months-long high-intensity fight, the medicinal efficacies of purifying Black Ink pill were only lasting less than 6 hours each now. Despite how many purifying Black Ink pills the humans had stockpiled beforehand, there was still a limit in the end. The same went for purifying light. Once the purifying Black Ink pills and purifying light ran out, regardless of how much of an advantage the humans had at that point, it would be hard to maintain it going forward. After fighting for so long, the human race army could no longer maintain the same intensity in battle. Now, when they charged, only half of the soldiers fought while the other half took the opportunity to rest and recover. This was the only method that Jing Lun could employ to maintain the combat capabilities of the human race army. But this plan would not work in the long term. As the number of royal lords increased, the pressure was also increasing for the humans, and the casualties were also rising at an alarming rate. The only comforting thing was that 8 of the 10 rising stars from the suppressing Black Ink army were able to advance to the Ninth Order. Including the Ninth Order masters they had before, the total number of Ninth Order masters now broke through the 40 mark. This was probably the final number of Ninth Order masters for the human race. Before this war ended, no one else would be able to safely break through again. Among the 8 newly advanced Ninth Order masters, Yang Kai's 3 legacy disciples were the most conspicuous. The 3 of them joined forces to perform Yang Kai's unique secret technique, the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel, killing more than 10 royal lords over the course of this battle. One should know that all 3 of them were in the Ninth Order now, so together, the might of the Sun and Moon Divine Wheel that they executed was even more powerful than even Yang Kai's. Moreover, Yang Kai's Sun and Moon Divine Wheel only contained spacetime strength, but their version also had the power of Zhao Yue's spear principles mixed in, which made it even more domineering. Even though the trio had just broken through, this secret technique was not something that the royal lords could resist. Unfortunately, the consumption of this secret technique was too great for the 3 of them, and they could only use it once a day. However, every time they did, a royal lord had died. The royal lords naturally took note of this, and whenever the trio appeared, multiple royal lords would move to engage them in a fight to the death. The human race army kept wandering the battlefield and fighting, slaughtering countless Black Ink clansmen, but the losses they sustained were also shocking. This seemed to be a war that would not end until both sides were wiped from existence. Despite having achieved far more than they ever had in any battle in the past, Jing Lun on Pyongyang Pass did not feel happy, and that was because he could not see any hope of winning this war even now. The 2 giant spirit gods were still guarding the opening at the Grand Restriction. These 2 had restrained dozens of royal lords and even killed some occasionally, but they were conveyed in wounds and nobody knew how much longer they could persist. Once their support fell, the opening of the Grand Restriction would be left completely open and the Black Ink clan could come pouring out in far vaster numbers. Every Ninth Order master was draining a great amount of power. Not one of the 40+ Ninth Order masters was without injury. Some had even sustained such great damage from the royal lords that they almost lost their lives. 8th Order masters were also struggling to maintain their battle formations. While the battle formations allowed the 8th Order masters to become more powerful, it was also a burden on them, especially for those acting as the core of the formation. The pressure they faced was much more compared to that of the other 8th Order masters. It was not a problem for a short period, but it was difficult for even the 8th Order masters to maintain a battle formation for an extended time. At the beginning of the war, the 8th Order masters were still able to form 7 stars and 6 paths formations, but even the 6 paths formation could no longer be seen now. The strongest battle formations they were using were now just 5 elements formations, while most of the 8th Order masters were only maintaining the lowest 3 fortunes formation to fight against their enemies. It was not that they did not want to form stronger battle formations, but they were truly strong in will but weak in strength. As for the soldiers under the Eighth Order, many had died when their warships were destroyed. The purifying black ink pills and purifying light were constantly being consumed, and no matter how much they had been saving up, they would see the bottom of their stock sooner or later. Even the small stone race army, which Yang Kai had distributed to the human race army beforehand, had been decimated. The geography of the battlefield was also a major hindrance for the humans. The ever-growing black ink clouds and black ink strength that filled the entire void seemed to be turning the battlefield into a black ink ocean. The Black Ink clan were like fish in water in this environment, while the humans were being heavily restricted. The divine spirits roared as they fought, but even they could not change the course of this war. As the fighting progressed until this point, not only were the humans unable to see any trace of hope, but they were gradually being submerged in despair. However, no one retreated, because they all knew that this was a war that could not be lost. If this war was lost, then the human race was likely to be wiped from existence. Everyone was holding on, waiting for a chance to turn things around. That glimmer of hope was now inside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. Naturally, it was the person who could create all kinds of miracles, and the one who has led the humans on the path of survival for the past few thousand years. It could be said that the current heritage and capital that the human race possessed that allowed them to carry out a second crusade had to be credited to him. Nevertheless, he had not appeared yet. So, there was still hope for the human race. The 700th world was a scene of doom. Black ink strength had already spread throughout the entire world. Yang Kai followed the faint trace and found the hiding Mu. After Mu infused all her remaining power into his body, she disappeared without a trace. In the 800th world, Yang Kai did not sense Mu's presence at all. Without hesitation, he activated the power that Mu's other shadows had left in his body and left this universe world. In the 900th world, peace reigned and everyone lived in harmony. Yang Kai successfully reunited with Mu and, with the help of the profound source gate, suppressed and sealed Mu's source piece before leaving quickly. The 1000th world. 100th. 200th. The cycle continued in a seemingly endless journey which Yang Kai was treading alone. Sometimes, Yang Kai needed only to follow the faint sensation to find Mu and then use the profound source gate to suppress and seal Mu's source piece. However, there were often times when things didn't go as smoothly as he hoped. There were universe worlds where black ink strength had spread everywhere, and even Mu's source piece had escaped. In these universe worlds, there was not much that Mu could do. She hid and waited for Yang Kai to arrive so that she could infuse the power of her shadow into his body. To make matters worse, there were some universe worlds where Mu had already been killed. Even though she was the most powerful of the martial ancestors, her shadows were only a state from a certain period of her life, and within those periods, her strength was limited. For example, in the 800th world, black ink strength dominated everything and Mu's shadow was missing. There was no reason for Yang Kai to even stay in such a world. There were also some worlds where black ink strength and Mu's powers competed against each other, similar to the situation in the primordial world. If Yang Kai had enough time, he wouldn't mind lending a hand to Mu, cutting off the wings of Mo and suppressing and sealing pieces of its source. However, through the messages transmitted by Wukong from the jade pendant that he wore on his chest, Yang Kai knew that the situation both inside and outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction was dire. He didn't have any time to waste, so he could only give up when he encountered worlds like these. Mu's shadow in these worlds did not object to any of his decisions, always imbuing their power into his body. Passing through one world after another, Yang Kai soon lost track of how many source pieces he had suppressed and sealed. He only knew that the further he went, the greater the likelihood that an unexpected encounter would happen. Often, he would pass through many universe worlds in a row and still find it difficult to suppress and seal even one of Mo's source pieces. He knew that his journey would most likely come to an end soon. Once he had suppressed and sealed enough pieces, Mo would awaken completely, and then he would have to face the most powerful existence in the world. Yang Kai didn't dare to linger. Besides wanting to suppress and seal even more pieces, he also wanted to take away all of Mu's shadows from each universe world. This predecessor had done enough for the human race. Even though she had fallen, Her life had been divided into 3,000 pieces and continued to protect the human race in the form of shadows. How lonely those shadows must have been over the years. Taking them away was also a kind of liberation for them. The power that the shadows infused into Yang Kai's body at their final moments seemed unremarkable. It couldn't even enhance Yang Kai's strength in the slightest, but this inconspicuous power was proof of Mu's existence and sacrifice. This was the greatest kindness his predecessor had given to the human race, so it was only right as a successor to show how grateful he was. There was little he could do for Mu. He could only try his best to free more of her shadows from their endless loneliness and waiting. It wasn't that he was unaware of the urgent situation the human race was facing outside the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. The information conveyed by Wu Kuang had already indicated that the humans were not in a good state currently. The prolonged intensity of this war had made it difficult for them to hold on any longer. Without external intervention, the human race would undoubtedly be defeated in this war, but Yang Kai was in no hurry to leave the spacetime river despite knowing that. Because the enemies that the human race had to face were not only the Black Ink clan army, but also Mo. Nobody had any idea just how powerful the legendary creator realm was, so Yang Kai could only suppress and seal as much of its source as possible to weaken its power and increase the chances of the human race's ultimate victory. Martial Peak. Martial Peak, Chapter 5969. It's her, Martial Peak. The towering bodies of the giant spirit gods were covered in wounds. They roared and bellowed, driving back one royal lord after another, like two powerful lions encircled by a pack of hyenas. Despite their immense strength and overwhelming power, the huge disparity in numbers allowed their small foes to run rampant. At this moment, there were almost 100 royal lords gathered around Rda and Ra. The giant spirit gods were powerful indeed, but they still had their limits in the end. Even together, Rda and Ra could barely handle the 100 or so royal lords attacking them all at once. With the giant spirit gods fully occupied, the Black Ink clan were finally able to pour out of the grand restriction unrestrained. Powerful auras emerged from the opening one after another and joined the battlefield. All the advantages that the human race army had worked so hard to build up were melting away under the constant stream of enemy reinforcements. The war had reached a most despairing point. Yang Kai still had not shown up. The human race army had suffered huge losses in this battle. Whether it be their numbers or warships they were relying on, it was hard to keep up. The many defenses deployed on Pyongyang Pass had also been blasted apart. At this moment, Pyongyang Pass was only covered by a few layers of the simplest defensive arrays. If they were to take a few more attacks, then it was likely that even these last barriers would be broken. Standing up on the wall, Jing Lun sighed in his heart. The limit of the human race had already been reached at this point of the battle. If they continued to engage, the last of their forces would be buried here. Have we failed? Have we not done enough? No. That can't be. Since the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds, thousands of years had gone by. The human race had not only recovered their homeland but also organized a strong force for a second crusade. They had crushed whatever stood in the way until they reached the primordial heaven's source grand restriction. They had done well enough. A few thousand years was a very short time for the development of an entire race. That the humans could recover from almost total annihilation to what they had today was a feat worth being proud of. However, their enemy was simply too strong. From primordial heaven's source grand restriction, the Black Ink clan's reinforcements kept coming, and no matter how many royal lords were killed, more would appear to take their place. Even with the two giant spirit gods to support them, it was impossible to stop this. Wu Kuang, Jing Lun called out through his surging divine sense, "How much longer will junior brother Yang take?" "Not much longer," Wu Kuang responded, "but we can't just rely on him in this war. Once he finishes his side of things, Mo will completely awaken, so he will have his own opponent. And if Mo awakens, the primordial heaven's source grand restriction will completely shatter. Once that happens, those hidden in the grand restriction will swarm out. When that happens, you will see the scale of the Black Ink clan army is much more than what you are currently seeing now. Then, is he a match for Mo?" Jing Lun asked another question. Wu Kuang answered without hesitation, naturally not. If he were to face off against Mo with his current strength, a death without burial is sure to await him. Mi Jinglun was silent for a moment, so to say, what we, the human race, are up against, is an unscalable wall. Wu Kuang responded, you could say that. Then there's no other way. What are you planning to do? A bitter look appeared on Mi Jinglun's face. Nothing. Junior brother Yang told me about his encounters in the universe furnace previously, and he also mentioned something at the edge of the universe. He anticipated the situation today before the war began, so he left a path for the human race to retreat to. Wu Kuang was surprised. The edge of the universe. It's a long story. Mi Jinglun did not have the time to explain in detail. Junior brother Yang told me that if the human race really was no match for the Black Ink clan, there was no need for us to go down fighting. He told us to preserve our power as much as possible, and he will bring our remaining kin to another world where we can find a suitable place to live. Wu Kuang wondered, such a place exists. Mi Jinglun was honest, I don't know, but if junior brother Yang says it does, then it definitely exists. If it does exist, it's not a bad choice. I will try to buy you some more time. If you want to retreat, then go quickly. We can't predict what will happen if things continue to drag on. Many thanks. Mi Jinglun thanked him, knowing that Wu Kuang might put himself in danger by doing so. After all, the ones in charge of holding back the enemy while the army retreated were always in the most dangerous position. After coming to a decision, Mi Jinglun did not hesitate any longer. In this current situation, every moment of delay would further increase the casualties to the soldiers. However, to be forced from their homeland like this, to a new world in a place they did not know. It really was shameful. But reality did not give the humans much choice. As he was about to pass down the order, Mi Jinglun suddenly sensed something and turned to look into the distance. He didn't see anything at first, but in the next instant, a bright light swept over from that direction, and in the next instant, the distance grew much closer, and the light also became clearer. So fast. Mi Jinglun was astonished. Right now, he was a ninth-order open heaven realm master, and if he exerted all his strength, he could reach immense speeds, but even at his best, he would probably not be able to reach a tenth of that light speed. Such speed was not inferior even when compared to Yang Kai's instantaneous movement. Who is that? The direction the light came from was from beyond the spiritless land, where the human race army had also come from. In other words, the one arriving was most likely a human race master. But, was there such a master among the human race? When the army set out, all masters who could participate in the battle were conscripted. Those who were left behind were either the old, the infirmed, the children, or those with insufficient cultivation. How could there be such a master hidden among them still? Just as Mi Jinglun was feeling taken aback, the other ninth-order masters and royal lords in the battlefield also sensed the unfamiliar aura. Nobody paid attention when they first sensed it, as who would dare to be distracted when fighting a life-and-death battle? But in just a few breaths, all the masters wore astonished looks on their faces. It was because the unfamiliar aura was approaching the battlefield at a speed beyond what they could fathom, and following the approach of that aura, a powerful force that made even the ninth-order masters and royal lords tremble pressed down on them. In just an instant, the light pierced into the battlefield. Since Mi Jinglun first detected the aura until now, less than 10 breaths had passed. He had been staring fixedly at it, but even with his current abilities in the ninth order, he couldn't see the face of the person who was coming. He only vaguely saw what seemed to be wings open behind the person's back, and it was from those wings that the dazzling light was flowing out. As this figure swept through the air, a long ribbon of light was drawn across the void. What's more, this figure disintegrated everything that stood in its way. When the light broke into the battlefield, the Black Ink clan army, which was fighting with great momentum, melted away in swathes like snowflakes under the scorching sun. Wherever the light passed, flames of life were constantly being extinguished. Even powerful royal lords were no match for the new arrival. One royal lord wanted to intercept them, but he suddenly froze in place before he could even make a move. When the light swept past, fresh blood suddenly spurted from the neck of the royal lord as his head flew into the air. The cut a huge swath through the middle of the Black Ink clan army and instantly arrived at the opening in the Grand Restriction. This was the battlefield of 2 giant spirit gods and many royal lords. The ordinary Black Ink clansmen wouldn't even dare to approach carelessly, and the human race army were also incapable of fighting side by side with the giant spirit gods here. It could be said that RDA and RR had been in an isolated and helpless position all this while. It was only until now, when a powerful existence arrived to aid them. Without any words, countless sword waves burst forth from the light, shooting towards various places in the void. Black blood flew and cries of misery rang out as many royal lords' auras were extinguished. With support, RDA and RR immediately turned from defense to offense, each one roaring and venting their pent-up rage. In a short while, the intense battle suddenly calmed down, and time and space seemed to freeze at that moment. Around 100 royal lords gathered in 2s and 3s, surrounding the 2 giant spirit gods and the master that suddenly appeared in the middle of them. Though their numbers were plentiful, each royal lord still had grave expressions on their faces. This couldn't be helped as numerous royal lords had already been killed in that short encounter just now. Moreover, all of them died under the hands of this unwelcome guest. What infuriated them even more was the fact that they still couldn't get a clear look at who it was that attacked them. They only knew that the strength of this human was incredible. But the royal lords were not the only ones who did not see the face of the new arrival. Even the Ninth Order masters did not see it either, and it was mainly because this person was too fast and everything happened within a very short amount of time. Jing Lun was already preparing to withdraw the army, leaving the battlefield with the remnants of their forces and waiting for Yang Kai to lead them to a new world, but before the order could be given, a new, powerful helper appeared to aid them. Only the divine spirits had a vague sense of who this was, especially Fu Guang. As the most powerful one among the divine spirits and a divine dragon of the dragon clan, he knew some secrets that the other divine spirits did not. Feeling the aura of this person, he had some ideas. The noisy and fierce battlefield also calmed down. The sudden silence that descended across the entire void during the midst of such a huge battle was truly unprecedented. The dazzling light gradually faded, and under the attention of hundreds of millions of eyes, the face hidden until now was slowly revealed. It was a young woman with a beautiful face. The pair of white feathered wings behind her gave off a warm aura that seemed to dispel all the darkness of the world. Under the light of her feathered wings, the body of the person exuded inviolable power. Even Ninth Order masters would subconsciously glance away when they saw the face of that person. It's her. Jing Lun had an astonished look on his face. He had imagined that the person coming would be a rare expert hidden among the human race, but he never thought it would actually be her of all people. He remembered this woman. After all, he personally handled the selection for the suppressing Black Ink army back then. It could be said that he personally selected all 6,000 soldiers of the suppressing Black Ink army from each army one by one. The reason he remembered this woman in particular though was mainly because of her relationship with Yang Kai. She had also come from the Star Boundary and was a disciple of Langya Paradise. If not for these relations, he would not have chosen this woman to join the suppressing Black Ink army. Based on her potential, she should not have been qualified for it. But what puzzled him was how this woman could actually become so powerful in the short 2,000 or so years he had not seen her. He clearly remembered she had initially broken through to the Fifth Order. In other words, her limit in life should only be the Seventh Order. But now, her power had not only surpassed the Seventh Order, it had reached a realm that even he, a Ninth Order master, dared not look straight at. Just from how she was cutting down royal lords like vegetables, she seemed to be even more powerful than the giant spirit god. Marshall Peak. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,